begin the skill. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Anya. I'm with the Quality Improvement and Education Unit here at OHRPP, and today in our BruinIRB series, we're going to be doing an overview of the continuing review, amendment, and a new type of application, a CRAM, which is both combined for BruinIRB. So as a reminder, we're being recorded. If you have questions, I do invite you to use the chat or the Q&A function during the presentation. So since we're migrating our active studies from WebIRB to BruinIRB in September and October, for many of you, the CR, AM, CRAM application is going to be the first type of application you submit in the new system. If you want a refresher on the migration process and a little bit more in-depth information about that, I would refer you to our last Learn at Lunch video, which is available now on our OHRPP YouTube channel. So this recording will be uploaded to our OHRPP YouTube channel, which will be available in our next Human Research News. We'll have a link. Everyone who have registered for today's session will receive a copy of these slides and a link to the video. Highly recommend signing up for the Human Research News to receive updates on trainings and other important information if you haven't already done so. So this presentation, I'm going to be going over some terminology and definitions, making sure we're all on the same page. I'm going to talk a little about give you an overview of the continuing review, amendment, and CRAM application. And then I'm going to give you a little bit of information as a reminder about the post-migration amendment or CRAM that we'll be asking you to submit after your studies have been migrated. What this presentation is not going to do, it's not going to be a step-by-step of every question in the application. You guys don't really have access to this application yet in the system, so we don't want to overwhelm you with sort of nitty-gritty information when you can't go in yet and apply that. However, we will have additional resources for just-in-time training when the time comes. We're going to have videos, quick guides, in-application help text to help you through that step-by-step of every question. Also, a little caveat that the applications are currently undergoing minor revisions, so the final version may have some minor differences in the screenshots that are presented today. So let's go over our terminology and definitions to make sure that we are all oriented. So continuing review, abbreviated as CR. If your study requires continuing review, this submission is what's required for IRB review to extend your study expiration date. Amendment, abbreviated AM, also known as a modification. This is a submission for modifications to an already approved study. So you'll notice already that the terminology really isn't changing too much from WebIRB to BruinIRB. The first two are exactly the same. As with WebIRB, studies that don't require annual review will complete annual assurances instead of a continuing review, and you'll still get email reminder notifications once your study's been migrated to BruinIRB about your upcoming continuing review deadlines. Next up on our terminology is continuing review and amendment, as we're abbreviating CRAM. So we're just smashing those two together. This is new for BruinIRB, and I'll talk a little bit about some things to consider when you want to submit both a continuing review and an amendment combined. And then BruinIRB's term for sub-applications to a main study is called a follow-on submission. So this isn't going to be a term that includes all of your continuing reviews, your amendment, your CRAMs, and also your post-approval reports. So we're not really going to talk about those today, what we abbreviate as PARs, but those also follow under the follow-on submission category. Okay, so now that we're all oriented to our terms, let's get into the application overview. So this is what your study workspace is going to look like. And we have a single button where you're going to click to create your modification or continuing review. This is a little different from WebIRB. There were different buttons for continuing review and an amendment, but we're going to have one button to create our amendment, CR, and CRAM. So once you click that, you're going to be brought to a page where it's going to be asking you the purpose of the submission. Here you can indicate if this is going to be a continuing review or study closure, if you're going to have be submitting an amendment or update, or if you want to submit both at the same time, amendment and continuing review. So going forward, in my example, I'm going to be creating a CRAM so I can show you all parts of the application here, the amendment and the continuing review. And we'll be talking about sort of both in the process.
I was just saying my computer froze.
Whoever's
Oh,
talking, if you
did
could
you say
please
that?
mute yourself, that would be
So I was
fantastic.
gonna say, but
What-
So next up, when you select that you want to be submitting an amendment or a CRAM and you're having amendment parts of the application are going to be open, is going to ask you what the scope of the application is. So you can click study team member information or other parts of the study, which is everything else. And these choices are going to unlock certain parts of the application. Um, and you in the at BruinIRB, like in WebIRB, you can modify personnel using the Edit Study Personnel Update. Or in BruinIRB, what's new is you can limit the scope of your amendment to updating just study team member information if you want to update information that can't be completed using the study personnel activity, like conflict of interest information. So what this means is that you can have two amendments open at the same time in sort of this limited case here. Editing study team member information as an amendment is not going to block you from creating another amendment to update everything else in your protocol. So for example, again, if you have an open amendment that is just modifying study team member information, you can have an amendment modifying other parts of the study and vice versa. And then, of course, as usual, you can select both of these options to update personnel and everything else in the same amendment. In this case, you can't create another amendment until one is approved. So this is a little new for BruinIRB, is that you can sort of have two amendments open at the same time in this limited case. So a more specific example, you have an amendment that has a large protocol, you're updating everything in the application except your study team member information, and then later on you want to go in and you want to update your co-investigators conflict of interest information. You can do that as long as you didn't already select the study team member information. If you already have an open amendment or CRAM modifying one of these selections, it's not going to be available for you to even select. And it's also going to show up here on the sort of main page here when you're doing all of your selections. As you can see in the highlighted red area, you can see that there's an active amendment for this study and it's updating other parts of the study. So in this case, we know that we're going to only be able to update study personnel as part of this amendment or CRAM. All right, so moving on, after we've answered our purpose, scope questions, you can then click Save or Continue to start the application. In the red text, I'm just going to read it out here for you. You need to be paying careful attention to any of the selections that are made here, because once you change it, once you make your selection, you're not going to be able to change it. So if you want to then add on a continuing review, if you just select an amendment, you won't be able to do that. If you select other parts of the study and you want to update study team member information, you're not going to do that. So once you go off of this page is locked and you would need to discard the application and create a new one. So that's just something to keep in mind, and that this page locks everything in terms of the scope of your CRs and amendments for this application. All right, so we're moving on in our CRAM example here. we can start filling out the pages. So we're first taken to the continuing review page. If, again, you're doing a standalone continuing review or study closure, this is the only page you would see and not the modification pages. This page, it's only one page, and it's going to be very similar questions to what you're used to in WebIRB. It's going to ask you study enrollment numbers, what the status is, if anything major has changed, changes in conflict of interest, other events that have occurred in the last year. We're also going to have you upload a study summary progress of over the last year. If you're doing a CRAM, you can actually go to the amendment part first by clicking on the appropriate section on the left-hand side and kind of jump around between completing the amendment and the continuing review. So you have the option of jumping around if you're doing a combined CR and amendment. All right, next in our CRAM example, we're going to be going and starting our modifications. So this is the modification summary section. If you're just doing an amendment, you would just see the modification pages and not the continuing review page. And here you will summarize your proposed modification and if participants will be notified. Again, very similar information to what you're used to in WebIRB. When you're done sort of telling the IRB what it is you're going to be changing, you're going to begin making those changes. So you can do so by just selecting the continue button or the modification details on the left-hand side. And we'll be taken to the study application where we can actually make our modifications. So in or in WebIRB, sometimes you had to go out and go back in. Here, you're just taken directly to the pages that you're going to be submitting or modifying. So in this CRAM example, we're just editing our study team members, and I'm taken to the study team members page, as you can see, because I didn't select any other part of the study. I don't have any other pages available to me. If you did select that, you would see additional sections on the left-hand side. I don't want to overwhelm people with new information. So next time on our Create a New Study Learn at Lunch, we're going to give you a lot more details about the sections of the application. Here's just an overview of the amendment and continuing review. So we'll jump into that at a future Learn at Lunch, but just know that you'll be able to edit those parts of the study in this section. One thing I want to point out is that there's a validate button on the top. In BruinIRB, like in WebIRB, it's going to check for any missing required items. If you click this button, it'll kind of give you all of the list of things you need to fill out before your study will be able to be submitted. And this is going to be useful in the first amendment or CRAM, since there's going to be questions you'll be asked to complete that were not filled in during the migration process, and I'll talk about that in a second. When you're all done, you're going to click Finish and move on to your study workspace. So this is the CRAM workspace here. You can see this is where the CRAM CRAM acronym comes in sort of at the top here after the IRB number. As part of the IRB number saying CRAM, it's a continuing review and an update. So you're going to see that your application is now in pre-submission. Like in WebIRB. And then the PI or PI proxy can click the submit button to submit this. For continuing reviews and new studies, we're making the process of faculty assurances and PI assurances very similar to WebIRB. If you have a faculty sponsor, you would submit to your faculty sponsor first, submit, and then submit your PI assurances. If there is no faculty sponsor, you would just submit and complete the PI assurances. For this, I'm not going to go back and forth or not going to talk about the back and forth you would have with our team here and how to respond to IRB requests. We'll have a future guide on video on how that will work for just-in-time training. One thing that's kind of a little different that I do want to point out is the continuation of active participants during study expiration. So in WebIRB, this was something that you noted within the application. Here, we want to make that really easy for everyone to be able to get approval and have that request be approved. So if you need to request continuation of study participants, if the study will expire, this is going to be done outside of the application using our send inquiry or reply activity. It's very similar to the similar activity that you have in WebIRB, where it's just a simple text box will open and you'll send your request and justification to your study owner, your IRB owner. The study owner will then send you a reply back informing you of whether or not your request has been approved. So that's something that's a little different in our system that I want to have pointed out for you. All right. And then if you want to find any of your follow-on submissions that are submitted after migration, this can be found in the follow-on submission tab of your main study application. So as a reminder, your previous applications will be in WebIRB as view only until the system is taken offline, anticipated later next year. So I want to talk a little bit about CRAMs because this is sort of new for everybody. And it's going to have a single review and single approval of everything being reviewed at once here. So we need to be a little bit thoughtful about the timing of our submission. So if your study expiration date is coming up and you have a complex change that you're submitting, a really involved amendment, you really want to think about whether a CRAM is the best thing to do in your specific circumstance. It could require a lot more back and forth with the IRB, and you may risk having your study expire while the application is under review. So just the thing to think about, is your study expiration coming up? Is this the best idea to submit the next phase of your protocol that's opening a new arm? That probably isn't the best idea. So if you have questions or want to know if this is something that the IRB may have a lot of questions about, you can always contact IRB staff assigned to your study. This is called an IRB owner in BruinIRB or your committee administrator. Because we don't want your study expiring. No one wants your study expiring. All right, so now I'm going to talk a bit about the amendment that you're going to submit after the migration process. So the migration process is going to map most of the responses in WebIRB to BruinIRB, and these will be pre-populated in your submission. Your current study documents are also going to be transferred. There are going to be a few questions that were not mapped, and we're going to need you to complete this in your first post-migration amendment or CRAM. So this is going to be 8 to 10 yes or no questions for studies using healthcare system resources, a few questions regarding the PI conflict of interest, an upload of your current study protocol or your summary, addressing questions regarding protected health information, your HIPAA questions. If you don't complete these you'll be directed to submit these in your amendment. If you'll see that you'll get a bunch of errors if you try and submit an amendment or CRAM without having completed these required questions first. This is not urgent, but we do want you to complete this before WebIRB is taken offline, or we need you to, estimated in fall 2025. And also, you're not going to be able to have access to the administrative functions like edit study personnel until this amendment is completed. So when your study is migrated, considering submit that first amendment to get these required questions done so you can start having access to some of these administrative functions and making sure your study is fully complete in BruinIRB. If you have questions about migration, again, please see our last Learn at Bunch video. All right. Well, that was a lot of information, hopefully not too much, but we're going to continue to explain more about the BruinIRB submission system at future Learn at Lunch presentations. Our next one is creating a new study. We're going to go over the different sections of the application. We've included registration links for all sessions and recording links for past sessions on our most recent Human Research News. So again, subscribe if you haven't already. So now we're here for any questions that you might have.